The Innovators Network.
Welcome to the Killer Innovation Show, the longest continuously produced podcast in history. Each week, Phil McKinney brings you the insights and strategies to amplify your creativity and innovation skills. Here's your host, Phil McKinney.
Welcome to this week's show. We are still in the bus and we are on the road. We actually will be heading back to Colorado here in the next few days. We are starting season 17. Really excited about that. A couple shows into it already. And stay tuned. We've got some great show content coming up. Today's show is a little different. We do have a guest. This is the first time we're doing a remote guest while I am on the bus, so I will apologize up front for some audio quality issues. We are on wireless broadband when we are on the road, so you never quite know how that's going to work out. I think it worked out pretty well. Today's guest is Cyril Bouquet. He is one of the three authors of a new book that's coming out called A.L.I.E.N Thinking. Yes, A.L.I.E.N Thinking. It is around innovation and creativity, and it teaches this concept of thinking like an alien, where alien breaks down into a framework of thinking about innovation. So, for instance, attention and imagination, experimentation. You want to listen to the whole interview. During the interview, Cyril also shares a number of stories. That includes stories of Kodak and the digital camera and Legos and a whole variety. He is a professor at IMD in Switzerland, has won numerous awards for his thinking on international business. This is somebody you want to listen. This is somebody you want to follow. We will have all of the contact information and all the links to their sites and everything in the show notes, so you're going to want to check that out. So without any further delay, let's jump into my interview with Cyril Bouquet and talking about his book on alien thinking. Here we go.
This episode is sponsored by Zoom. With Zoom, you can streamline your communication, collaboration, and creativity all in one place. Zoom is the market-leading platform that provides video meetings, voice, webinars, and chat across desktops, phones, tablets, and conference room systems. To learn more about Zoom and sign up for your free account, visit killerinnovations.com/Zoom.
So, Cyril, give us a little bit of your background. How did you get involved in, one, IMD, where you're at, but also the whole space of innovation?
Yeah, my pleasure indeed to share a little bit of my background. I'm a professor of innovation and strategy at IMD, which is one of the most interesting places, I think, in the world that exists when you want to work with real executives who face very fascinating challenges in industries that are fast changing. And obviously, we are academics, so we do research. We try to help them out, face those challenges. And I got into this world. It's a little bit of a funny story because I was, doing my studies in Canada. And the last thing I wanted to do is to become a professor. My two parents were professors themselves. And if you ask me, I would say, no, I never want to do this job. But then as a French person, I was also French and Canadian, I had to do my military service. And obviously, one way you could do your military service is by doing a civil service. And so I started to become a professor at the University of Ottawa in Canada. And that's what got me into this track, right? I loved the job. And so went back to school, did my PhD, and then, was a professor in Toronto, but then came to IMD, which is this very special place, right? Where indeed I have the opportunity to work for business executives on their reinvention journeys. And that's what got me to IMD. Now, very quickly, what got me into this innovation sphere myself is that I've been an immigrant most of my life. I was raised in tropical islands, New Caledonia, Réunion, in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Then, obviously, lived in France, lived in Canada, now in Switzerland. And every time I've been to a different country, I've realized that, hey, there's many different ways of approaching the same situation. And that really taught me something about the act of creativity and the fact that there was no standard practice, right, that should be replicated across different spheres of activity, and that really got me interested in how can we resolve problems that exist in this world and the field of innovation.
Well, I think that brings up an interesting point about how different parts of the world can look at the same problem in completely different ways.
Absolutely.
Right? And it is a little bit of, what I sometimes will refer to as fresh eyes. How do you look at it as fresh eyes? And this kind of tees into the book that you and your co-authors have just come out with, which I have to say, the title was a little interesting. I had to get over the title to kind of say, okay, what is this book really about? But when you start using the word alien on the cover of a book around innovation, you kind of throw some questions up.
Yes, I guess it can make some people feel uncomfortable. In fact, the anecdote behind the book is that before we came out with the book, obviously our work was in progress, and we published an article with essentially the thesis of the book for Harvard Business Review. And they loved the paper. It was full of really interesting stories about people that were trying to bring progress to this world. And they said, we love the paper, we kind of publish it as is, but we'll drop the alien thing, right? They were not comfortable with this metaphor that we were using. And we said, okay, fine, because in fact, we wanted to continue developing, right, this particular concept. And that's what we did in the book. But indeed, there's a lot of interesting facets to this imagery of thinking like an alien that is intriguing, and that of course we can talk about.
Well, yeah, I mean, the obvious joke I could make is which alien did you interview to figure out how aliens thought? But we won't go there. But alien really is a moniker that you use to identify kind of the key elements to what you believe are the key elements to be highly innovative, to come up with truly new ideas, not to get caught in the traps. Am I correct on that?
Absolutely, Phil. And the alien, if you will, at first sight is a metaphor that highlights the need to sort of get rid of your baggage, right? I mean, we are all coming to a particular situation when we try to understand what sort of problems exist in this world that we could solve, what solutions make sense. We all come with our own sets of experiences, beliefs, skills and capabilities, and those color the way we actually look at the world. And obviously, if we want to be innovative, we have to get rid of those assumptions, which sometimes reduce the field of possibilities. So we have to think like an alien who would come from a different planet, maybe look at the Earth and say, oh, this is interesting. This planet is inhabited by cars. And those cars have slaves, that sort of drive them around the city. So obviously, that interpretation is not the one that we think is correct. But who is right? There's many different ways of thinking about how life is organized, and that's what the alien does. So that's kind of the first level. And then, but thinking like an alien is almost like saying, you need to, to escape those assumptions. You need to think out of the box, and that's easier said than done. And so we've heard that advice many times before. But what is important is also, how do you do this, right? And what we explore in the book is ALIEN is an acronym, and essentially there's 5 kind of strategies that people can use and apply to their own field, whether it is innovation in a typical business, or in a startup, right, or any sphere of life. How can I embrace a mindset that will unleash my imagination and really increase the odds that I can come up with breakthrough solutions to problems I face in my life, but also make sure that those breakthrough solutions are not shot, right? And yourself here, you've published a lot on the sort of corporate antibodies that exist that make it very difficult sometimes for innovators to succeed. And that's what we think of when you think about aliens, right? I mean, how often are they portrayed as good guys in the movies, right? I mean, often they are people that you're very skeptical of, that you may want to shoot before they harm yourself, right? And so that's what we wanted to explore in the book.
So walk through then the 5 elements. So you're using alien really as a nomenclature for all of these, which you classify as really critical elements. Walk us through those really quickly, just
Yeah.
to make sure we all got that same foundational information.
Absolutely. So the A stands for attention, which is, how do you look at the world, right? And we need to often sort of magnify the lens that we use to look at the world. And so sometimes we need to zoom in, other times we need to zoom out. We need to switch our focus so that we can enrich the way we look at the world and essentially have fresh eyes, right? And so that's for A, for attention. Then L is for levitation, right? There's a lot of information out there, and a very important part of the innovation process is to actually step back, give yourself a chance to pause, reflect on what it is that you're doing and what is it that you should be doing differently. And so we call this levitation, which is to separate yourself from action and really create a space for you to expand your understanding and gain perspective. The I is for imagination, and frankly, a lot of kids have it, a lot of adults lose it because they stop playing. Right? And for us, imagination is playing with ideas. Your capacity to envision concepts that do not exist today, often result from odd combinations and the way you put things together without a clear hypothesis at the start. Right? And so you need imagination. You need to have the mindset of a kid when you play with ideas. And therefore, that leads to E, which is also experimentation. How do we experiment? How do we test ideas? Everybody's testing ideas, but often the way we do it is actually wrong. One of the executives I've met and I've worked with told me, if you torture the data long enough, it will confess. And so that's often what happens. We are experimenting to prove that our thinking is correct, and we stop learning along the way. So we try to provide a way to remain fluid and open to exploration and discovery in the experimentation process. And the end, Phil, is the one that you've written a lot about. Right? It's one thing to think beyond the obvious, but then how do you get other people to see the merit of those ideas and don't destroy the beauty of what you do before it has a chance to actually establish itself? And so navigation is about finding ways to again go around the forces, right, that can block your progress, but also leverage and seize the forces that can provide support. And so navigating is often the most critical part in the innovation process. People underestimate the difficulty of navigating those forces. And so that's a big chunk of what we do in the book.
So let's walk through these, because I know in the book you highlight a couple of points, which in some cases listeners of this show are going to say, hold on, Phil, you've talked the other side of this. And it's true. Look, like everybody in the innovation space, like everyone's going to have their own opinions. And I've told you, the listeners, your role is to find what works for you, because what works for company A does not work for company B. This is not a one size fits all. It depends on the project, depends on the team, depends on your organization. One is, and I think I actually agree with this, albeit, the framework we teach is called FIRE, focus, ideation, ranking, execution. Your attention, I think of it as kind of focus, but you also pop a flag about not getting too focused, because too much focus actually can constrict the ability to come up with really new ideas. You end up with kind of this incremental problem.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I mean, there's a fine balance to be found, right? Because we need focus, and that's why we talk about the importance of zooming in and really being engaged with particular set of stakeholders and getting privileged information from them, and then concentrating on certain types of issues that can make a big difference to the world that we live in. But at the same time, right, often we might focus on the wrong things. And this is why we often encourage people to at least take the time to increase the span of their attention and to really engage with a multiplicity of stakeholders, and also not just the usual suspects. Right? And so this is why we also talk about switching focus. And there's an interesting example in the book of Kellogg, right, the cereal company, and obviously they wanted to develop a new diet for kids. And they've talked to all of the usual suspects, right? I mean, they've talked to the nutritionists, they've talked to the school educators, they've talked to the parents, obviously, of the kids, they've engaged with the kids themselves. But everything that they've heard, they felt they already knew, right? It's only when they switched focus and they started to talk to the janitors at school. And of course, the janitors are in the odd places, the kids don't even notice the janitors are there. They're also present during school recess. and they see what ends up in the bin. They see what kids trade during recess, food items that they trade. And so it's by talking to the janitors that actually Kellogg got a lot of insights around not just the nature of the diet, but also how do you make it fun, right, for kids, right, to actually engage with the meal that you prepare for them. And those insights actually came from the school janitors. So you see, you had to force yourself to switch focus, to engage people at the periphery, and get those unique insights that maybe the more traditional innovation process might have missed or discarded.
Yeah, and I think you in the book, I think you refer to it as the submarine process, right? So you're kind of going deep. McKinsey refers to it as porpoising. It's like a dolphin going up and down. You go deep, but then you got to come up. You got to kind of get your perspective and then go back down. Versus a lot of people just go deep and they stay deep for forever on the project. And I think that variation also plays a key role, because otherwise you lose perspective of where you're really headed, right? Because otherwise you just kind of get the blinders and you're going heads down.
That's right. You can't be on this narrow path, right? I mean, that's essentially a theme in the book, is that if you really want to give yourself a chance to come up with a truly innovative, radical concept, right, you need a little bit more fluidity than what is often taught or allowed, right, in organizations. And so indeed, going up and down and left and right is often necessary, and zigzagging is often part of the creativity process.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about imagination. You talked about it when you just introduced it to us here about, kids having a high level of imagination, and then as adults we don't play and therefore have lost it. And in fact, in the last couple of weeks, I did an episode where I actually found a study a number of years back that pointed out that in a NASA creativity test, like 98% of the students, 98% of the kids under the age of 6 passed the test. Yes, only 18% of adults passed the test.
Interesting.
And it's a test for NASA,
yeah.
for finding the most creative engineers to work on NASA problems.
Yeah.
What's your take on this? Because we've heard enough about it. There's been some great TED Talks about the loss of creativity.
Yeah.
What's the real problem there?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? I mean, indeed, I think what happens when, as we go older, is that we get socialized, right? Indeed, into the right way of doing certain things. But it's not just the norms. I mean, schools tells you what is the right answer. What are some behaviors that you should try to reproduce to be respected in a group or in society in general. And so the path becomes clear. And the moment you deviate from that path, you're afraid of the judgment of others, right? And as we know, exploring new paths and exploring very creative ideas might lead to a few situations where, you're confused, you're not sure you're on the right track. And if people are constantly observing what you do and judging your success, right, it's not a very comfortable situation to be in. So, but kids are less afraid, right, of what others think of their own performance. But I also think, that there's something else. It's not just the judgment of others, it's ourselves, right? I mean, as we grow older, right, and as we become adults, we become obviously concerned about our own success. And we want to protect what we've spent enormous amount of time, sort of building in the past. And so our, expectations, of success is also different than what we have when we are a kid. And I often, in fact, show a video of my daughter. She's 8 years old, and I show the first day that she was on the ski, because we live in Switzerland. We are close to wonderful mountains, and so my kids have been skiing since the age of 2. And so here she goes, for the first couple of hours, she's on this sort of rug, where they're basically learning how to walk with their skis, and then she ventures into the snow, and of course she goes down and she falls. But she does it, laughing, and she gets up immediately and have this on video, and she's like, "Oh, I keep falling," but it's a fun process. When I fall today, when I ski, let me tell you, Phil, it's not fun, right? I mean, it hurts. Right? I mean, I don't like to fall. Physically, it's difficult. I'm stiff. It hurts. But therefore, I also stop learning. And every time my kids fail, it's no big deal, and they try again. But I think it's a good metaphor for what happens to us when we develop ourselves, we succeed, and then we become a little bit more reluctant, to explore the unknown and not be immediately successful. And of course, especially if people are watching.
Yeah, well, I think the people are watching can also be right, because the best analysis I've been able to derive in the work that I've done in education and how to innovate educational systems, et cetera, is this whole mantra around conformity.
Yeah.
As the kids get older, they look around, they don't want to dress differently, they want to act like everybody else, they don't want to stick out. But if I look at like my one of my youngest grandchildren, I've got a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, they don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care, if she's got mismatched shoes and one pink sock and a yellow. She doesn't care.
Yeah.
Now, she gets into older high school age, she's probably going to care more about what she looks, because she doesn't want to stand out. She wants to look like everybody else. And I think the same trap falls into the business world, where we talk about innovation and creativity, but you've got some pretty hard guardrails on what you can think or how you should think.
Yeah.
And I think that puts some constraints on people.
Absolutely, it puts some constraints. And I mean, one of the companies I'm working with today, actually, right, as an interesting aspect of their culture, which is that they're trying to develop a winning culture, but at the same time trying to be innovative. So they try to win, but also to be innovative. And I said, hey, so how do you deal with failure, right? If the most important aspect of your work requires to win, how do you deal with failure? I said, well, you can fail once, and that's good experience. Now you can fail another time, and that's good experience. Maybe you can try again, but in a different company. And so that doesn't really help you to innovate, right? And so again, you have to conform, right, to certain types of behaviors. You have to succeed, and kids are less concerned about that. Now, there's another thing, right? I mean, is that kids the way they learn is that, again, they do things and then they see what happens, right? And so they put things together and they see what happens. And so they play with ideas. With adults, we don't like to play. We like to, again, think right ahead. We have a plan. And the more time we think right ahead, the less we are willing to, again, play and see what happens to develop our view on the future, right? So the more we think, the less maybe we innovate, because we don't give ourselves a chance to play with ideas that might be interesting, but that look very, very far-fetched.
Well, this gets into then the E of how to think like an alien, which is around experiment. And you gave a quote around, you had worked with an executive who used to use the quote that was, if you stare at the data long enough, it will eventually confess. Now, listeners of this show have heard me talk about this, and I actually have written some articles about this, because this is one of the, challenges that was when I was CTO at Hewlett-Packard, when Mark Hurd was CEO, because that was Mark Hurd's quote that he would just never let go of. And the problem being is data by itself can actually lead, you think data is validation, but data can actually lead to bad decision making, because it's used to rationalize the decision rather than going out and really experimenting around the ideas versus I don't want to say over and analyze, but you can't steer a business purely from a spreadsheet, I guess is my experience.
And that's why we had this chapter also on experimentation, because to me that's one of the most difficult issue that innovators have to deal with. Because on one hand, you're asked to bring progress to this world, whichever field you're working on, and you develop ideas and you fall in love with those ideas. I mean, obviously it requires a certain degree of conviction to go through an innovation journey. And so once you develop those ideas, they become your theory of the world, right? And then everybody tells you you've got to actually show that those ideas have merit. So you go and you experiment, but essentially what you're trying to do is to gather evidence that will provide support for your ideas, right? That's what a good scientist does, right? I mean, you have developed a theory, now go find support for your theory. But in the process, obviously, right, we are searching for evidence. And indeed, as you say, we see the data, but we're going to use the data to rationalize, right, the story that we have in mind, and essentially build a good business case, or build a pitch that will be persuading other people to support us. We're not really there to learn. And that's one of the big challenges. And so obviously there are things that you can do to avoid falling into that trap, right, and be more fluid and remain open to learning and discovery in the experimentation process.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I've seen for some organizations is they don't understand how to construct a good experiment. They call everything that's a test an experiment. Oh, we're going to do a market survey. That's an experiment. Or we're going to do a focus group. Oh, that's an experiment. No, there's good experiments and there's not such good experiments. And be careful of the decisions you make based on the type of experiment you think you're running.
Yeah.
Because it's the whole issue of just human nature, cognitive bias, or more importantly, confirmation bias. I already have the answer. I'm going to construct a test that validates what I think is the right answer.
That's right. And in fact, again, when people think about an experiment, they think about an hypothesis, right, that you need to test. But in fact, you could have all kinds of experiments without a clear hypothesis in mind. What is important in a good experiment is, in fact, do you have competing, sort of tests, right? I mean, so we talk about A and B testing, but today with digital technologies, you could actually test, hundreds, thousands, millions of possible variations of an idea, and again, let the data tell you, what is happening, right? I mean, you have a new marketing message, right? Are there many variations of that marketing message that could be tested, on social media, and where you actually see what is the message that actually resonates with customers, and you don't have an hypothesis in mind, you don't know, right? But you just let the data speak. And I think that's what when I did my PhD, that's what my advisor was telling me, let the data speak. And I wasn't sure I understood what that meant, right? But again, I force people I work with to have always a lot of tests being run in parallel, right? So that they can actually look at the data and not be attached, right, to one particular project, one particular hypothesis, exactly, that they can be more open, right, to what actually the data is trying to tell them.
Well, I think it's in it, you and I were recording or talking before we got into the show today about, your book coming out and my, experience now, having published my first book 12 years ago, or 10 years ago now. I look back and I probably should have paid more attention to what Tim Ferriss did, because Tim actually did A/B testing for titles of books, for literally hundreds of titles, before he came up with the 4-Hour Workweek, which went on to become New York Times bestseller and all of that. And Tim and I knew each other. He was involved at some work he did for us at HP. But this was before he was famous, and he wanted to make sure he got the title right, and he tested cover designs, color, and titles itself. And I probably should have listened a little closer to that one on the on titling. The last point on A.L.I.E.N is navigation, and as you pointed it out in your own description, navigating, I guess you call it navigating the landmines of going from an idea to making it real, making it a real innovation that's going to have impact. And you're saying that it's the hardest part of it. Describe what you mean by that.
Well, I think innovators often tend to sort of overestimate, if you will, the way the beauty that they believe exists in their ideas, is going to be perceived by people who can potentially bring support, to their cause. So, I mean, again, you've worked hard, you've identified a problem that matters, you come up with a solution that you think, can make a real difference. And obviously when you present it and now you need the green light, you need support, you need commitment from people, you kind of hope that people will see it, right? But the reality is that often they don't, right? And so on one hand, we overestimate the natural impact that we can have on people with simply sharing the beautiful idea that we've developed, and we underestimate the negative reaction. So not only we don't get necessarily the support that we hope for, but we actually can get a lot of skepticism and sometimes outright opposition, because there's a number of people who, for good reasons, when they see a very disruptive idea, feel, geez, what is this going to do to us? Is this going to bring progress to the organization, to the industry, or is it to bring a kind of disruption that might actually interfere, right, with this beautiful path that we can foresee? And again, there are countless examples, right, that we could tell, and stories that you've told also, Phil, right, where incredibly powerful ideas are being killed all the times because they conflict, right, with established lines of power in an organization. They disrupt the existing business models, and they simply create questions, right, that people have. People are trying to protect what is good about the company, and when they see those very innovative ideas, they're not quite sure, right, if those ideas are going to help or disrupt, right, the nice system that exists. And so you've got to manage those frictions, very actively if you want to succeed.
Innovators just love to fall into their ideas. It's like they believe that everybody should just hop onto the bandwagon, that the value of the idea is so obvious. But we tend to forget about the fact that the best idea doesn't always win. There is so much that gets wrapped around an idea that determines whether it's successful or not. We have to keep in mind that the success for any given innovation, the success of taking that idea and turning it into one of those innovations, is such incredibly low.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, because often you conflict, right, with actually the interest that people have to preserve the existing system. When James Dyson approached all of the vacuum manufacturers to say, hey, I've sort of come up with a new way, right, a bagless sort of system. Right, they all rejected his invention because essentially what it meant for them is no more bags to sell, right, for those vacuum cleaners. So again, how many times do we see beautiful creations that get squashed because they actually threaten, right, a very established and often profitable way of doing things. And one interesting example that we tell in the book as well is the one from Steve Sasson, who was the inventor of the first digital camera. And obviously he came up with a radical concept, but he made a mistake. When he presented his innovation to the top management team of Kodak, he said, ladies and gentlemen, this is filmless photography. And obviously at that moment, he conflicted, right, with the established system that essentially what made people proud working with these companies, that they were so good at making films. And so when you say filmless photography, you're basically conveying the view that you're taking the company to a place that we don't know, right, even exist, and how are we going to compete in that space. And it took him a few years to actually evolve the language to digital films. And when you talk about digital films, you essentially rally people behind a concept that they really care about. It's just a new way of achieving a cause, a mission that is very dear to our heart, right? And that's what disruptive innovators have to do. They have to wrap their disruption in a language that will resonate with people, that will tell them, look, yeah, it's a different way of doing things, but we're all behind the same cause, right? And that's what they often don't do enough.
That is such an important point. Language matters. I mean, language really matters. Ability to change language to the audience, whether you're talking to executives, if you're an entrepreneur, or talking to a venture capitalist, or talking to press and media, talking to customers. The language you use to describe your idea, to describe your innovation, is so critically important. And I've had the experience so many times of where bad language gets in the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, in the book, again, I mean, the former innovation director from Lego told us, you've got to be a diplomatic rebel. And I think, it's also the title of a book that is quite an interesting read as well. And that means you have to build bridges, right? I mean, you cannot just innovate and convince people without building those bridges. And obviously, when we build bridges, the language, right, that we use, is actually key. And if you compare the Steve Sasson story with another story where there was a good use of language, there's this gentleman that we interviewed for the book, and we tell the story, Jonathan Ledgard. He was doing his PhD here at the University of Lausanne, the EPFL School of Engineering, on drones. But it just happened that actually in his prior life, he was a war journalist, right? So he was actually working for the Economist, traveling in all kinds of places where people were at war. And then he realized that people were using donkeys to transport small loads of blood supplies and medication to very remote parts that could not be reached, right, by road. So they were using donkeys. And obviously that process took a lot of time. And he was doing his PhD in drones. He said, obviously, we could use drones instead. Now, he could have gone to Africa and talked to the chefs of the village and say, hey, why don't we bring drones to transport blood supplies? But instead, he told the chefs of the village, what if we put your donkeys into the sky? And he created a company called Flying Donkeys. And obviously, the imagery really resonated in that part of the world. And he was able to build bridges and create support for his ideas that really brought, again, a lot of progress to those small villages, right, that could not be reached by air or by road, in a very easy way.
That is such a great point about putting the idea in their perspective, into the user's perspective. Not your perspective as an innovator, but their perspective. That is a great way to wrap up our conversation today. As we wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity to share more about the book and how people can keep up with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil, for giving us a chance to talk about the website that we just created, that we just put up. It's alienthinking.org, alienthinking.org. So the same title as the book, alienthinking.org. And it's an interesting resource because essentially, we wrote a number of key stories of people who have captivated us over the years and in different fields, right? So whether it is business or social entrepreneurship or the arts and science. And we put those stories on the book, and so you can get a feel for what it means to think like an alien. And of course, we'll continue to maintain this website. We'll provide some tools and a diagnostic, right? So visit the website from time to time, and it has all the links towards your favorite bookstore. So whether it is Amazon or some other bookstore that you use regularly, then the book will be available there. So you can find that all on the alienthinking.org website. And you can also connect with us. And from the website, you get all of our sort of LinkedIn and Twitter accounts. So you can just connect with us by clicking on the buttons. It will be very easy.
And we will have all the links in the show notes over at killerinnovations.com. Cyril, I just want to wish you and your co-authors all of the best. The book has great stories, great insights. I would encourage all of you to take a look at the book, A.L.I.E.N Thinking. Thanks again for joining us here today on Killer Innovations.
Thanks for having me, Phil. It was a pleasure.
I don't know about you, but that interview with Cyril was an eye-opener for me. Look, I live in the innovation space. I do this every day, but sometimes you just have to get reminded. And I think the point around language and changing the language, critical when trying to drive and deliver and convince people to join on to your ideas. And I think also the stories of companies like Kodak and Legos and others, I think, are great just reminders of how different organizations go about the overall innovation process. And yes, you can be frustrated. Yes, we all run into the innovation antibodies, but it takes tenacity. It takes innovation grit to work through these things and to deliver the innovations that have these significant impacts. So before we go any further, I just want to ask a favor, and that is tell others about the show. If you found this interview to be interesting, insightful, maybe triggered some thoughts, forward it on to somebody. Subscribe and like, post a comment, give us a review. All of that helps us get the word out about the show. And yes, we are now coming into season 17. We're kicking that off. We're already a couple of shows in now. And we've been doing this for quite some time, but always appreciate you, the listeners, helping us get the word out and sharing it with others. I'd also encourage you to check out Cyril's book, The A.L.I.E.N Thinking. Now, as I said in the beginning of the interview, the word alien was kind of like a little bit of a, what is this all really all about? But once I got into the book, great material, great insight. It is based on an article the three of them wrote for Harvard Business Review, which got great, strong reviews on it. So you're going to want to check that out. Also, I would encourage you to join the Innovators community if you want to extend the conversation about the book or any of the other books we've talked about, or any other book that you think is interesting that people in the community should know about. It's a free community. There's no charge. It's where innovators hang out from around the world, from literally, I think, every continent now. We've been getting a number of college students are now joining in to connect and to share their ideas and to get support to be entrepreneurs, take those ideas and do something real with them. So check it out. Hop on over there. It's where you can ask questions and where you might be able to answer the question that somebody else is asking. The way to do that is just go over to theinnovators.community. Theinnovators.community. It's free of charge. And it's a community of just innovators. And it ranges everything from chief innovation officers to global 100 companies, all the way down to college students who have an interest in ideas and innovation, being entrepreneurs, coming up with an idea to solve a problem, whatever it might be, and everything in between. So it's your opportunity to connect with other innovators from around the world. So check that out, theinnovators.community. So go check that out. And as always, everything we've talked about today, all the links, everything will be in the show notes. So you can hop on over to killerinnovations.com. I'm looking for guests and show suggestions. We've got a good content catalog coming up, but always looking for questions you would like to have answered, topics that you think would be interesting, or things you would just like to know. Because if that's the case, my guess is there are other listeners who would also like that same information. You can drop me an email over at phil@killerinnovations.com. That bypasses anybody. It comes right to me. And I will read those and organize those and put those together into possibly a future show. So again, drop me an email over at phil@killerinnovations.com. With that, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. Hope you enjoyed the interview. I know I sure did. And I appreciate you taking that time. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Podcasting nonstop since 2005, this has been the Killer Innovation Show on the Innovators Network.
This show is distributed by the Innovators Network. For more information and other great shows and content, visit theinnovators.network.